Past midnight, the east corridor breathes the particular silence of a castle that has finished performing for the day. No footsteps, no distant voices, only the sound of my own soft shoes against cold stone and the weight of unsigned decrees pressed against my chest. I was not supposed to be here this late. I am never supposed to be anywhere interesting. That is the arrangement I made with this castle 3 years ago, and it has served us both well. Then I saw the light, a thin gold line beneath a door that should have been dark. I assumed a forgotten lamp, a servant's carelessness, nothing more. I shifted the decrees under one arm, turned the handle, and opened the door. The Alpha King of Valethorn was standing 3 feet away from me. Silver eyes, dark shirt half undone, completely, unnervingly still, the way a man goes still when he has been caught and his mind is already moving faster than the moment. And pressed against him, her jeweled fingers curled into his collar, her face tilted up toward his, Lady Seraphine, Elder Cain's wife. She had not seen me yet. He had. That was the part I could not stop thinking about afterward, that he saw me immediately, and the thing that moved behind those silver eyes was not guilt, it was not panic, it was calculation. Cold, fast, immediate. The look of a man already deciding what to do with what just happened. I closed the door, quietly, the way I do everything. I walked back to my chamber, sat on the edge of my bed, did not sleep. The castle outside my window kept its peace as though nothing had changed, as though the world had not just rearranged itself around a thin gold line of light beneath a door that should have been dark. I sat in the silence and understood, with the particular clarity that comes only at midnight when there is nothing left to hide behind, that my carefully constructed invisible life had just developed a crack. And cracks, in my experience, do not stay small. 3 months later, Lady Seraphine's pregnancy was announced in open court. Elder Cain stood at the front of the great hall accepting congratulations with the satisfaction of a man whose legacy had just been publicly secured. The court smiled and toasted and celebrated. Noble after noble approached him with warm words and warmer ambitions. I sat in the back row with my notebook open and my pen still, and did the arithmetic. The numbers were not complicated. They were not ambiguous. They did not change no matter how many times I ran them, and I ran them 4 times before I accepted what they were telling me. The child Elder Cain was accepting congratulations for almost certainly belonged to the Alpha King. I looked at Aldrich across the great hall. He stood at the head of the room with his glass raised and his face revealing precisely nothing, which was, I was beginning to understand, its own kind of answer. I closed my notebook, folded my hands, sat very still in the back of a celebrating room, and understood that my silence was no longer simply caution. It was a weapon, and someone was going to use it. The only question was whether that someone would be me, or the man with silver eyes who had already proven, in the space of one open door, that he was significantly better at this game than I was. Let me tell you what I was before the door. I was the woman you looked past. Not unattractive, I know that, the way I know most things from careful observation rather than personal investment. dark eyes, ink-stained fingers, a castle uniform I wore with the deliberate plainness of someone who had decided long ago that being noticed was a luxury she could not afford. I had been a royal court scribe for 3 years. In 3 years, I could count on one hand the number of council members who knew my name. This was not an accident. This was architecture. I had built my invisibility the way I built everything, methodically, without sentiment, checking the structure twice. I arrived before anyone else and left after everyone had stopped paying attention. I filed documents that decided the fates of territories and trade routes and noble families, and I did it without a single person in that castle understanding that the woman filing those documents was also reading them, carefully, completely, with the particular attention of someone who has learned that information, quietly accumulated, is the only currency available to a woman with no land, no title, and no political value. I was good at my work. I was invisible at my work. For 3 years, those two things were the same thing. Then there were the council sessions. I attended them as furniture. That is not bitterness, it is accuracy. I sat against the wall with my notebook and recorded decisions, and spoke to no one, and no one spoke to me. And Aldrich, the Alpha King, silver-eyed and composed, and carrying the particular weight of a man who has ruled since he was too young to fully understand what ruling costs, would stand at the head of that table and navigate impossible rooms with a quiet intelligence that I documented with my pen and filed, privately, under things that are not for women like me. I want to be honest about this because the story requires it. I had feelings for him. Not the feelings of a foolish girl. I was never a foolish girl. I could not afford it. Feelings assembled from 3 years of his correspondence and council decisions, and the occasional unguarded moment when he thought the room was not watching. I fell for the space between his documents and my imagination. I knew exactly what it was. I knew exactly what it could never be. I filed it away with the same clinical efficiency I gave everything else and got on with my work. I was very good at getting on with my work, until the night I was not. The door, the room, his shirt half undone, Seraphine's jeweled hands, and those silver eyes finding mine across the dark with that flash of cold arithmetic that told me, before a single word was spoken, that my careful, invisible life had just ended. I closed the door, walked back to my chamber, sat completely still on the edge of my bed for a very long time. I did not cry. I am telling you that, not as a point of pride, but as a point of character. Crying requires a kind of surrender I had trained out of myself years ago. Instead, I opened my notebook to a fresh page and wrote in my cleanest handwriting every possible outcome of what I had just witnessed. There were 6. None of them were good. 2 of them ended with my exile. 1 of them ended with something I would not write down even in a private notebook in a locked room at midnight. I closed the notebook, sat in the dark, and somewhere in the castle, behind a door I had already closed, the Alpha King was doing his own calculations. The worst part was not what I saw. The worst part was that he saw me seeing it, and the look on his face was not guilt, it was arithmetic. I recognized it because I was doing the same calculation. The difference between us was that he had every move available to him: charm, authority, denial, danger, and I had exactly 1. Silence. For now. 3 months is a long time to carry something you are not allowed to put down. The warning arrived before the first dawn after that night, slipped beneath my door while the castle still slept, written in a hand I did not recognize, on paper that carried no seal, no signature, nothing that could be traced back to anyone. It did not need a signature. Its meaning was precise and complete in 11 words. Silence is survival. The choice, as always, is yours. I read it twice, folded it once, fed it to the candle flame, and watched it become nothing. Then I went to work. That is what I did for 3 months. I went to work. I filed the documents. I attended the council sessions. I sat against the wall with my notebook and recorded decisions and looked at nothing and no one for longer than was professionally necessary. I told myself the feelings were filed. I told myself the door was closed. I told myself I was fine, with a consistency that should have alarmed me, and did not, because I had been telling myself useful lies for so long I had developed an almost professional fluency in them. I almost believed it. Then Seraphine walked into the great hall on Elder Cain's arm, and the court saw what I had been seeing for weeks, the careful way she moved, the particular fullness in her face, and the celebration began before the formal announcement was even finished. Elder Cain stood at the front of the hall and received congratulations with the satisfaction of a man whose legacy had just been publicly secured. Noble after noble approached him. The king, Aldrich, silver-eyed and composed at the head of the room, raised his glass with the rest of them. His face revealed nothing. It never revealed anything. That was the first thing I had ever admired about him, and it was currently making me want to put my notebook through a window. I sat in the back row and did the arithmetic for the 100th time, and got the same answer I had been getting for 3 months. That child was not Elder Cain's, and every person in that glittering, celebrating hall was about to spend the next several months congratulating the wrong man. That night I allowed it. Just once. Just that night. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, and I stopped filing, and I let myself feel the full weight of what I had been carrying since that door swung open. Not grief for what I witnessed. I want to be precise about this, because precision is all I have left. The grief was not for Seraphine, or for Cain, or for the complicated disaster of a child caught in the middle of something it did not choose. The grief was mine, personal, embarrassing in its specificity. I had imagined it. I will not pretend I had not. The way you imagine something you know is impossible, with one careful hand always on the door, ready to close it the moment the wanting got louder than the sense. 3 years of his correspondence, 3 years of council sessions and unguarded moments, and a version of him I built from inference and distance, and the particular loneliness of a woman who observes everything and is seen by no one. I had imagined, in my weakest and most private moments, what it might feel like if he ever looked at me and saw something worth looking at. And now I was sitting here doing arithmetic about another woman's pregnancy, and I had to find somewhere to put that. The feeling, the 3 years of it, the quiet humiliation of having felt it at all, for a man who had looked at me across that room with cold calculation and apparently felt nothing that was not strategic. I sat with it until it stopped moving. Then I folded it up, filed it somewhere deep and final, closed the drawer, opened my notebook. I had 4 pages of documented patterns, land transfers, appointment shifts, supply chain anomalies that I had been quietly assembling for 6 weeks without fully admitting to myself why. I looked at them now with clear eyes and understood, for the first time without flinching, what they meant. This was bigger than an affair. I was picking up my pen to write that down when the knock came. I opened the door. A sealed envelope, the royal crest pressed into dark wax, still warm. Inside, 4 words in a handwriting I recognized from 3 years of filed correspondence. I would see you. No time, no location, no explanation, just that. The king's handwriting, the king's seal, and the absolute certainty that this was not an invitation. I read it twice, sat back down at my desk, and wrote in the margin of my notebook, in letters small enough that no one but me would ever read them, "Here we go." He did not summon me to punish me. That was the first thing I understood when I walked into his study and found him standing at the window with his back to the door, completely unhurried, as though he had all the time in the world and chosen to spend some of it waiting for me. No guards inside the room, no council members, no witnesses. Just the Alpha King of Veilthorn and a scribe who knew something she was not supposed to know, standing 6 feet apart in a room full of expensive silence. He turned, and the thing that undid me, the thing I was not prepared for, was that he smiled. Not the political smile I had catalogued from 3 years of council sessions. Something smaller, something that reached his eyes in a way I had never once documented in 3 years of careful observation, and that I found, to my intense professional irritation, I did not have accurate language for. He asked my opinion. Not about my silence, not about the door. He asked what I thought about the northern border dispute currently paralyzing the council. Had I noticed anything in the recent correspondence that the advisors might have missed? He asked it the way you ask someone whose answer you actually intend to listen to. I told him, because I had noticed something as it happened. I had noticed several things, and nobody in 3 years had ever asked. He listened with the full weight of his attention, and I felt it the way you feel a change in weather, that shift in atmospheric pressure that tells you something significant is coming before you can see it in the sky. When I finished, he said I was right. Simply that. You are right, as though it were obvious, as though a scribe's analysis belonged in the same room as a king's decision. I walked back to the records room and sat down and stared at my notebook for 4 minutes before I remembered how to use a pen. He began appearing after that. The records room, 3 days later, a question about a misfiled land decree that he absolutely could have sent any clerk to retrieve. The council corridor the following week, falling into step beside me with the ease of a man who had decided we were the kind of people who walked together now. The library after dark, twice, in the space of 10 days, both times with a reason just plausible enough to be insulting. I documented every appearance, dates, times, duration, stated purpose, actual purpose. I catalogued the deliberateness of his warmth the way I catalogued everything else. methodically, without sentiment, building a picture from accumulated evidence. The picture was not reassuring. He remembered things. That was the detail I could not file cleanly, no matter how many times I tried. Small things, specific things, the kind of things a man only retains if he has been paying attention in a direction he has not announced. He mentioned, in passing, during our second library encounter, that he had noticed I take my tea without sugar. He said it the way you say something you stored without meaning to, casually, almost parenthetically, as though it were simply a fact about the world, rather than evidence that he had been watching me closely enough to notice. I told myself it meant nothing. I told myself that 3 times on the walk back to my desk. I am not sure I believed it any of the 3 times. I saw Seraphine on a Thursday. Not the court wife, not the jeweled, composed, carefully presented woman who had been accepting congratulations for 3 weeks with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. I turned a corner in the east corridor and found her standing alone in a window alcove with one hand resting on her stomach and her face completely unguarded for the first and only time I had ever witnessed. She looked exhausted. She looked frightened. She looked like a woman doing arithmetic, calculating which version of the truth destroyed her least and finding no good answer in any direction. I recognized the expression because I had been wearing it for 3 months. I did not speak to her. She did not see me. I kept walking and filed what I had seen in the part of my mind reserved for things that would matter later, and I thought about the child she was carrying, and the husband who did not know, and the king who did, and I understood for the first time that the disaster I was standing in the middle of had more casualties than I had initially counted. I was still thinking about it when I heard him behind me. Not his footsteps. I had learned those. His stillness. The particular quality of air when he was present in a space. I turned. He was standing at the end of the corridor, 10 feet away, looking at me with an expression I did not have documentation for. He said my name. Just my name. Nothing attached to it. No title, no instruction, no careful political framing. Just Mara, spoken quietly in an empty corridor, like it was something he had been holding and had finally decided to put down gently. I nodded once, kept walking, did not look back. That evening, I opened my notebook to a fresh page and wrote in the smallest handwriting I owned, "He said my name today. Just my name. I have been in this castle for 3 years, and I believe that is the first time anyone has said it like it was worth saying." I stared at the sentence for a long time. Then I turned the page and found something that had not been there this morning. A single folded note tucked between pages I had not opened since yesterday, in a hand I did not recognize, containing 6 words that made the room go very cold. "We know he has been visiting you." I did not sleep that night. I sat at my desk with that note in front of me and worked through every possible source: Cain's people, a council spy, someone in the library who had noticed the king's after-dark visits, a servant whose loyalty ran in a direction I had not mapped. The note meant I was being watched, had been watched, possibly for weeks. Every appearance he had made, The records room, the corridor, the library had been observed and documented by someone other than me. Someone who wanted me to know they were watching. Someone who had access to my private notebook and had chosen, deliberately, not to take it, but to leave a message inside it instead. A warning or a threat. The difference between the two, I was learning, depended entirely on who was holding the pen. I turned the note over, held it to the candle, watched it become nothing. The second piece of dangerous paper I had burned in 4 months. Then I opened a fresh page and kept working. He came to the records room the following afternoon as though nothing had changed. I watched him cross the room toward me and thought about the note and thought about the 6 words and thought about everything I knew and everything I still did not know and arranged my face into the expression of a woman who was professionally engaged and personally unreadable. He sat across from me without being invited and looked at me with those silver eyes and said, quietly, without preamble, that he wanted me to be careful. Not careful about what I knew. Careful in general. Careful in the corridors. Careful about who I spoke to and what I carried and where I walked after dark. I looked at him for a long moment. "Am I in danger?" I asked. He held my gaze. "You have been in danger," he said carefully, "since the night you opened that door." The honesty of it was so unexpected that I had no prepared response. I simply sat with it, and he sat with me sitting with it, which was its own kind of answer. The days that followed were a study in controlled tension. I changed my routes, varied my hours, stopped going to the library after dark, which was a loss I felt more than I intended to, though I documented the feeling and filed it without comment. I paid attention to who paid attention to me, and I began to notice the shape of Cain's network in the castle, the way you notice a web, not by looking at it directly, but by observing what moved carefully around it. He had people everywhere. Servants who reported upward, junior council clerks whose appointment shifts placed them precisely where information moved, a guard rotation that put specific men at specific doors during specific hours. It was elegant. It was patient. It was the work of a man who had spent 18 months building something he intended to be permanent. I spent 4 days mapping it. Then 2 more days mapping what I was going to do about it. It was on the 6th day that Aldrich asked me to walk with him. He came to the records room at the end of a Thursday and asked, not commanded, not summoned, asked if I would walk with him in the inner courtyard after dark. He stood in the doorway with his hands loose at his sides, and the particular expression of a man who is prepared to hear no, and something about the asking was so different from everything I had come to expect from him that I said yes before I had finished deciding to. The inner courtyard was cold and empty, and lit by a moon that had apparently decided to be unhelpfully romantic about the whole situation. We walked without speaking for longer than was comfortable, and I waited for the strategy to reveal itself, the careful warmth, the specific memory deployed at precisely the right moment, the attention that felt like being chosen and probably was not. It did not come. What came instead was quieter than anything I had documented in 3 months of careful observation. He stopped walking, looked at the far wall, and told me that he had not slept properly in 4 years, not since his father died, not since he understood fully what ruling actually cost, and found there was no one in the castle he could say that to without it becoming information someone would eventually use against him. He said it without preamble and without apparent agenda, and with the particular exhaustion of a man putting down something heavy in front of a witness for the first time. He said it like it was true. I stood beside him and felt the armor shift and told myself it was a technique. Told myself I had documented this exact method, vulnerability as currency, honesty as seduction. Told myself I was a scribe, and I knew the difference between evidence and interpretation, and I should not confuse the two. I was still telling myself that when he turned and kissed me. I had thought about this, in the way you think about things that are never going to happen. With one hand always on the door, always ready to close it before the wanting became something that could not be taken back. In every version I had imagined, he was simply a man, and I was simply a woman, and the distance between us was only distance, not history. This was not that. This was something I had wanted, arriving 3 years too late, and one secret too heavy, and carrying the particular weight of everything I knew and could not unknow. The door. The room. Seraphine's jeweled hands. The child growing in her body that belonged to the man currently kissing me with a gentleness I had not expected and could not fully defend against. I let it happen. One moment. One long, suspended moment in a cold courtyard under an unhelpfully romantic moon, because I am human, and I had been very tired for a very long time, and I had wanted this quietly and completely for 3 years, and the wanting did not care that the timing was a disaster. Then I stepped back. He let me. That was almost the worst part, that he let me without argument, without pressure, with nothing but a look on his face that I did not have clean documentation for, and was not going to let myself interpret. I walked back to my chamber with my spine straight and my face still, and my heart conducting itself in a way I found deeply unprofessional. The letter was under my door. I almost missed it. A folded paper half tucked beneath the edge, no seal, no name on the outside. I picked it up with the detached efficiency of a woman who receives official correspondence at all hours and had stopped expecting anything good from unmarked papers months ago. It was in his handwriting. I knew his handwriting. 3 years of filed correspondence. I would know it in the dark. It was dated 6 weeks ago, addressed to a senior court official whose name I recognized from the land transfer documents I had been quietly assembling. And in the 3rd paragraph, between 2 sentences about border administration, were these words: "The scribe situation requires continued management. Her cooperation and discretion remain essential to the current stability. I trust you will ensure the appropriate—" The rest had been cut away. Deliberately. Leaving just enough. I read it twice. Sat down on the edge of my bed in the dark. Did not cry. I do not know if he put it there. I do not know if someone else did. Cain's people, watching his visits, using the letter to fracture exactly what it had fractured. I know that it does not matter. I know what I am to this court. I know what I have always been. I know what a woman like me is for. I should have known better than to forget it. Even for one cold courtyard, even for one honest sentence about sleepless nights that might have been true and might have been the most sophisticated thing anyone had ever deployed against me. even for one kiss, that I had wanted more than I had wanted anything in 3 years. I should have known better. I do know better. I opened my notebook, picked up my pen, and began writing in my cleanest, most careful handwriting. Every document, every transfer, every appointment shift, every piece of the pattern I had been assembling for weeks without fully admitting to myself what I was building. I wrote for 2 hours without stopping, because tomorrow I was going to find out exactly who left that letter at my door, and if it was him, if that courtyard and that honesty and that kiss were all architecture, all management, all careful investment in a scribe's continued cooperation and discretion, then I was going to make sure that the case I was building was airtight enough to stand without him, and with him if it came to that. Either way, I was done being managed. I was still writing when I heard footsteps stop outside my door, and then, very quietly, a knock. The knock at my door that night was not Aldrich. It was a royal guard, 2 of them, standing in my doorway at midnight, with the particular expressionless courtesy of men delivering something they have been specifically instructed not to explain, holding a document with Elder Cain's seal pressed into black wax like a wound. I was to appear before the full council tomorrow morning, first session. I closed the door, stood in the middle of my chamber with the document in my hands, and understood, with the cold clarity that had become my closest companion over the past several months, that the knock I had been waiting for all evening had never been coming. Whatever had stood outside my door and then walked away had made its calculation and chosen silence. Again. The council chamber was full, every seat occupied, which meant this had been arranged rather than convened. Word had gone out, attendance had been strongly encouraged, an audience had been assembled. Elder Cain sat at the far end of the table with his hands folded, and his expression carrying the particular satisfaction of a man who has been patient for a very long time and has finally arrived at the moment his patience was building toward. The charge was read aloud by a court clerk whose voice did not shake, which I respected, because mine would have. Malicious slander, deliberate fabrication of falsehoods regarding the personal conduct of the Alphating, in violation of the dignity of the crown and the honor of a noble house. Penalty, if upheld, immediate exile from Valethorn and all territories under its jurisdiction. The room watched me the way rooms watch executions, with the careful stillness of people who are grateful it is not them. I stood in the center of it and breathed, and looked at Elder Cain, and saw the thing he was not quite concealing behind his composed expression. This was not purely political. This was personal. He had done his own arithmetic about his wife's pregnancy, and he had arrived at a number he could not accept, and he was doing what powerful men do when reality becomes intolerable. He was destroying the nearest available target and calling it justice. He did not have proof. He had suspicion, and he had fury, and he had enough council votes to make suspicion sufficient. I turned my head and looked at Aldrich. He was at the head of the table, silver eyes, perfectly composed, wearing the expression I had spent 3 years documenting and 3 months learning to read past, the face he showed the room when he had already decided something and was waiting for the room to catch up. I gave him 1 moment. Just one. I want to be precise about this, because precision is the only thing I have left that belongs entirely to me. I looked at him across that chamber, and I gave him one moment to be something other than what I now knew he was. To say anything, to intervene, to object, to simply say my name the way he had said it in that corridor, like it was worth saying. One word would have been enough. He said nothing. His eyes met mine for exactly 2 seconds. Then he looked away, back to the middle distance, back to the careful, neutral performance of a king who was not involved in whatever was happening to a scribe at the center of his council chamber. And I understood, not with anger. What I felt was quieter than that, older. The specific sensation of a door closing inside yourself that you had been holding open without admitting it for 3 years. The man I had quietly loved from a careful distance had never existed anywhere except in the space between his documents and my imagination. I had built him out of ink and inference and loneliness. He was not real. He was architecture. Mine. He was not real. And I was going to be fine. Not today, but I was going to be fine. I turned back to the council and I began to plan. I was given 3 days to prepare a formal response. 3 days, I almost smiled. 3 days and 3 years of documents, and a memory that had never once failed to retain what it was given. Elder Cain had moved against me because he thought I was a scribe, useful, quiet, containable, and ultimately disposable. He had forgotten, the way everyone in this castle had always forgotten, that the scribe is the one who keeps the records. I walked out of the chamber with my spine straight and my face perfectly still, turned the corner into an empty corridor, leaned my back against cold stone and pressed both hands flat against it, and breathed, slowly, deliberately, counting until the shaking in my chest moved down through my legs and out through the floor. It took longer than I would like to admit. Then I pushed off the wall and walked back to my chamber. I opened the files. Not the personal notebook. That was for feelings, and I was finished with feelings for the foreseeable future. The professional files. 3 years of council records, correspondence, land transfers, appointment shifts, supply chain documentation. Every piece of the pattern I had been assembling for weeks laid out across my desk in the particular order that told the story I needed the council to hear. I was not doing this for Aldrich. I want that on record, even if the only record is this one, even if the only reader is me. I was not doing this for the throne, or for the kingdom, or for the king who had just watched me stand alone in his council chamber and chosen the middle distance over my name. I was doing this because Elder Cain was a traitor, and I had the evidence, and I had spent 3 years being the woman who sees everything and says nothing, and I was done. I was completely, finally, irrevocably done. I picked up my pen. And then my door opened. Not a knock, not a guard. The handle turned and the door swung inward, and I was on my feet before I had consciously decided to move, my files instinctively covered, my face arranged into something neutral. Seraphine stood in my doorway. Her jewels were gone, her hair was down, she was wearing a plain robe, and her face was completely unguarded in a way I had only seen once before, in a corridor alcove, from a distance. She looked at me across the threshold of my chamber with an expression I recognized with uncomfortable precision. She knew. She knew that I knew. She had known for months, and she had come, at whatever cost it had taken her to get here, to tell me something. Her mouth opened, and what she said made every document on my desk suddenly, violently insufficient. Elder Cain had found the letters. Not guesses, not arithmetic. Letters, written in Aldrich's hand, kept in a box she had hidden badly because she had never genuinely believed her husband would look. He had looked. He had read them, and he had said nothing to her for 6 days, which she told me with the particular terror of a woman who understood that her husband's silence was more dangerous than his rage. He was not moving against me because he suspected. He was moving against me because he already knew, and dismantling me publicly before the council was the first move of a man preparing to burn everything down. I sat with that information for exactly the amount of time I could afford to sit with it. Then I looked at Seraphine. Really looked at her, the way I had looked at her in that corridor alcove, and I made my decision. I told her to sit down. I told her what I was going to do, and I told her how I was going to protect her while I did it. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she asked why. Why would I protect her after everything? I picked up my pen. "Because you did not choose this," I said, "and neither did your child. Now let me work." I wrote through the night. I was in the council chamber before Elder Cain arrived. That was intentional. I wanted him to walk in and find me already standing at the front of the room with 3 years of documents on the table and the particular expression of a woman who has finished being afraid and moved on to something more useful. I wanted him to have one moment, just one, the same one he had given me, to understand that he had miscalculated. He walked in and saw me and went very still. I began before the session was formally opened, before the council had fully settled, before Cain could move or object or deploy whatever he had prepared. I simply began, in my clearest voice, with my steadiest hands, and once I began, I did not stop. I led with the treason, not the affair, not the pregnancy. 18 months of documented sabotage, land transfers, appointment removals, supply chain redirections, the methodical, systematic dismantling of a king's power base by a man who had spent a year and a half building toward a single moment of calculated removal. I read from my own records. I cited dates. I named figures. I presented the pattern with the same meticulous clarity I had given every document I had ever filed, except this time I was the one deciding what the records said. The room went quiet by the 3rd page. It stayed quiet. I framed Seraphine last and carefully, not as conspirator, but as asset, placed and used by a husband who had sacrificed his wife's autonomy without once asking whether she consented to be deployed. I told the version of the truth that protected the child and punished the man who deserved punishment, and left the rest in the sealed record I had prepared the night before, stored for history rather than court gossip. By the time I finished, the chamber was completely silent. Then it was not. Elder Cain was taken into custody before the session closed. Seraphine was escorted out under the king's guard, a victim exactly as I had framed her. The paternity question became a matter for quieter conversation. I had made sure of that. I walked out of the chamber on legs steadier than they had any right to be, and did not look at Aldrich once. He came to my door that evening. I knew his knock by now. I stood on my side of it for one moment, just one, and then I opened it. He looked like a man who had run out of calculated things to say and had arrived at my door anyway because he had nowhere else he wanted to be. No performance, no careful warmth, just a king standing in a doorway looking at a woman who had saved his throne and his child and his kingdom and had done it without once asking his permission. "You protected my child," he said, "when I gave you every reason not to, when I left you standing alone in that chamber and said nothing." I looked at him for a long time. "I know what you did in that chamber, and I know what you are, what you have been. I spent 3 years building a version of you I could admire from a safe distance. He was a good man, that version, worth wanting, but he was mine, not yours. I made him out of documents and distance and loneliness, and you had nothing to do with him. What I let go of in that council chamber was not you, it was him. And it was everything. But it is done now, and if you want to be someone worth knowing, the actual you, not my version, you are going to have to do that on your own time, with no expectation from me. I am not your redemption. I am not your reward. I am a woman who has work to do. You can come in, but you come in knowing that." He came in, sat down, did not perform or charm or manage a single thing. He simply stayed. He stayed until the candle burned low and the castle went quiet, and my pen kept moving across the page, and he did not once try to fill the silence with anything calculated, just his presence in the room, unremarkable, unperformed, uncalculated. The first genuinely honest thing I had seen from him. It was not enough, not nearly, but it was a beginning, and I, who had spent 3 years filing beginnings without ever letting them become anything, decided quietly, without ceremony, without any particular softness toward either of us, to see where this one went. 6 months later, Seraphine's child was born healthy. The paternity question lived in a sealed record in a drawer in my new office, documented in my cleanest handwriting, stored for history, protecting the child from ever becoming anyone's weapon. I was the only person who knew exactly where it was. I intended to keep it that way. My desk was larger now. My title had changed. My access to the kingdom's records was no longer the quiet, unacknowledged access of a woman everyone looked past. It was formal, documented, authorized. I had spent 3 years being useful without credit. I had decided I was done with that arrangement. Aldrich had spent 6 months earning rather than assuming. He had learned, slowly and at considerable cost to his considerable pride, the difference between managing a person and knowing one. Some evenings I did not answer the door, and he went away without demanding, and came back the following evening without resentment, which I found, improbably, to be one of the most significant things about him, that he could go away, that he came back anyway.
He was not easy to know. Neither was I. We were learning that about each other with the same careful, incremental honesty I brought to every document I had ever filed, without assumptions, checking the record twice, willing to be surprised by what the evidence actually said, rather than what I expected it to say. I did not love the man I had imagined any more. I had buried him quietly in a council chamber, while my hands were steady and my voice did not shake. What I had now was stranger and harder and far less comfortable than anything I had spent 3 years quietly wanting in the safe dark of my own imagination. Some evenings I still felt the ghost of that old wanting, the clean version, the distant version, the version that never had to survive reality. I let it pass through me the way you let a cold draft through a room. Acknowledge it. Do not chase it. close the window when it has gone. I was not the scribe anymore. I was not invisible anymore. The door I had been most afraid to open was never the one in the east corridor. It was the one inside myself, the one I had kept shut for 3 years because opening it meant admitting I wanted things, real things, things that could be taken from me. I opened it. Everything that followed was the consequence. And I was still standing. That, I think, is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything.